The hills are alive. You heard it just now, didn't you? Before a single note played, before a single word of the script was spoken, the hills are alive, because that is what the sound of music does. It lives somewhere just below conscious thought, folded into the memory alongside every version of your own childhood and every room where you've ever watched it play. On March 2, 1965, Robert Wise's film adaptation of the Rodgers and Hammerstein stage musical opened at the Rivoli Theater in New York City. Julie Andrews as Maria, Christopher Plummer as Captain Georg von Trapp. 7 children, a convent on a hilltop, and the shadow of the Nazi Anschluss, darkening everything behind the music. Critics were divided. Some called it too sweet, too sentimental, too big, and too simple. Audiences ignored every word of it and went back again and again and again. What followed was one of the most unlikely and extraordinary commercial runs in movie history. A film that essentially saved an entire studio. A film that held its place at the top of the box office for longer than almost any other in history. A film that 60 years on still fills theaters, still teaches children how to sing do-re-mi,
do-re-mi, do-re-mi,
and still makes grown adults quietly tear up when the Von Trapp family walks out onto that festival stage. Today, before TV and cinema is climbing every mountain and crossing every fact to bring you 10 untold secrets and hidden facts about the sound of music. The casting close calls. The near disasters on and off set, the things the film quietly changed about the real story, and the little details hiding in plain sight that most fans have never fully stopped to notice. Before we get into it, hit like and subscribe to Before TV and Cinema for more deep dives into the movies you grew up with. And share this one with someone who still hums my favorite things whenever it rains. Let's go, starting with number 1.
Number 1, the film that saved 20th Century Fox.
Now, here is the context that most people miss when they think about the sound of music, and it turns the film's story into something much larger than a musical about a singing family in Austria. The Sound of Music didn't just become a hit, it rescued a dying studio from the edge of complete financial collapse. And without understanding how close Fox came to ruin, it's impossible to fully appreciate what the film's success actually meant. In 1963, 2 years before The Sound of Music reached theaters, 20th Century Fox had committed virtually its entire financial resources to an epic production called Cleopatra. The film starred Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton and went catastrophically over budget, and it won, at the time, the most expensive production in Hollywood history. The financial fallout was severe. Fox was brought to the brink of bankruptcy. Executives lost their positions. The studio's future was genuinely uncertain. Into this environment came The Sound of Music. It was a modest $8 million production by comparison, predicts it, but it was everything the studio had left to bet on. The pressure behind the film was enormous. Director Robert Wise and star Julie Andrews were not making a prestige project, they were making a film that Fox desperately needed to work. It worked beyond anything anyone had imagined. The Sound of Music made $20 million in its first 10 months alone. It knocked Gone with the Wind from its record-holding position as the highest-grossing film of all time, a position it held for 5 years. When the final numbers came in, The Sound of Music had single-handedly restored 20th Century Fox's financial standing. A film about raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens had rescued one of Hollywood's oldest and most storied studios from the consequences of a disaster made of ancient Egypt and excess. There is probably no other movie in Hollywood history where the stakes behind the camera were quite this high. And almost none of the audience filing into theaters in March of 1965 had the faintest idea.
Number 2, Maria was almost someone else.
Now here is the casting history that reshapes everything you think you know about The Sound of Music. Bueno, because Julie Andrews in the role of Maria feels so inevitable today that it takes real effort to remember how many different paths the film could have taken to reach a completely different actress in that opening meadow.
Well, now that there's just us, would you please tell me all your names again and...
The route to Julie Andrews was longer and stranger than most fans realize. Paramount Pictures had originally acquired the rights to the Von Trapp story years earlier with the intention of starring Audrey Hepburn as Maria. When that plan fell through, and Paramount let the option lapse, the project landed at 20th Century Fox, and the list of names that followed reveals exactly how far from obvious Andrews' casting actually was. Doris Day was seriously considered. Leslie Caron was in the conversation. Anne Bancroft was discussed. Grace Kelly's name was floated. These were not casual suggestions. These were the kinds of names that reflected genuine studio thinking about who had the marquee value and the musical ability to carry a film this size.
The hills are alive!
The twist in the story is that when screenwriter Ernest Lehman first pushed for Julie Andrews, Fox was skeptical. Andrews had enormous Broadway credibility. She had originated the role of Eliza in My Fair Lady in 1959. But she was largely unknown to film audiences. She had no box office track record. She couldn't play guitar. She wasn't, by the studio's calculation, a guaranteed draw. What changed everything was Mary Poppins. Andrews had filmed the Disney musical before The Sound of Music, but it hadn't been released yet. Director Robert Wise was shown early footage of her performance, and that was enough. He committed to Andrews immediately. Mary Poppins had yet to open, and already it had secured Julie Andrews one of the most iconic roles in cinema history. The role that almost went to Doris Day, Grace Kelly, or Audrey Hepburn went instead to a woman the studio had originally doubted, and produced the performance that defined an era.
Number 3. He called it The Sound of Mucus.
Now, here is the story behind one of the most openly, cheerfully hostile relationships between an actor and his own most famous film. And it is a story that Christopher Plummer, to his credit, eventually told himself with something close to affection. From the very beginning of production, Christopher Plummer was uncomfortable. He was a classically trained Shakespearean actor who had built his reputation on stage with difficult, demanding material.
Have my children, by any chance, been climbing trees today?
Never entirely made his peace with it during filming. The sentiment it required, the sweetness it asked him to inhabit, the fact that he was surrounded, most of the day, by 7 children who needed to believe he was their father. Plummer developed a nickname for the film that he used freely, The Sound of Mucus. He also described the experience of working opposite Julie Andrews with a line that has become one of the most quoted observations in Hollywood history. He said it was like being hit over the head with a big Valentine's Day card every day. And yet, and this is the part that most people don't hear past the jokes, Plummer and Andrews remained close friends from the moment filming ended until Plummer's death in February 2021. The cynicism and the friendship coexisted without any particular contradiction. Andrews herself said in interviews that Plummer's discomfort with the film's sentiment probably helped his performance, giving the captain a complexity and an edge that kept the whole thing from tipping into pure confection. Plummer spent decades maintaining a careful distance from the sound of music in public, and then, in the later years of his career, gradually softened. He lived long enough to understand what it meant to people, even if he never fully understood why. He was 91 when he died, and The Sound of Music was, as he had long suspected it would be, mentioned in the first line of nearly every tribute written about him. He had predicted it. He had accepted it. He was, in the end, at peace with it.
Number 4. That wasn't his real singing voice.
Now, here is the detail that arrives like a quiet shock, especially for anyone who has ever sat with the captain's version of Edelweiss and felt the emotion in it as something completely genuine and personal.
Blossom of snow, may you bloom.
Christopher Plummer sang during production. He performed all of his musical numbers on set. He rehearsed them, committed to them, and delivered them as part of his overall performance. By all accounts, the singing was not embarrassing. Plummer had a decent enough voice for the material.
Edelweiss, Edelweiss.
But director Robert Wise made a decision during post-production that Plummer reportedly did not find out about until later. The captain's singing voice in the finished film, the voice in Edelweiss in the gazebo in the festival hall, belongs to a professional studio singer named Bill Lee. Plummer had been dubbed without his knowledge. There is an extra layer of irony attached to this, given that Plummer already had complicated feelings about the film. He had also made his feelings about Edelweiss specifically known. He considered it banal, overly sentimental, and wrote directly to screenwriter Ernest Lehman asking for it to be replaced. That request was rejected. The song stayed. And then the voice that delivered it most memorably to audiences around the world turned out not to be his at all. Plummer was not the only one. Peggy Wood, who played the Mother Abbess, the woman who sings the film's most soaring solo, Climb Every Mountain, also had her singing voice dubbed. A fact she freely acknowledged by explaining she was simply too old to handle the vocal demands of the role. The voices that generations of audiences have carried with them from The Sound of Music belonged, in at least 2 significant cases, to people who were never seen on screen.
Number 5. A helicopter knocked her down.
Now, here is the production story that sits directly behind the most famous single image in the entire film. Because that opening shot, Julie Andrews spinning in a vast mountain meadow, arms wide, the hills stretching out in every direction as the camera circles from above, is as iconic as any image in the history of movie musicals, and getting it required something close to physical punishment. The meadow is located in Bavaria, Germany, not Austria, as the film's story would suggest, on land that was, at the time of filming, privately owned by farmers. Getting there required the cast and crew to ride up the mountain in large open carts pulled by oxen. The camera equipment went with them. Crew members managed the terrain without facilities, without shelter, and in frequently brutal weather. To capture the sweeping aerial shot, a jet engine helicopter was brought in. The cameraman personally operated the camera while leaning out of the open helicopter door because that was the only way to avoid the machine casting a shadow into the shot. A series of megaphones was positioned across the hillside so that crew members could signal Andrews when to begin her movement. And then the helicopter would circle. And each time it did, the downdraft from the jet engines flattened Julie Andrews to the ground, not gently, flat, into the grass and the mud. Andrews recalled in interviews that she braced herself every time, dug in her heels, told herself it would not get her this time. And every time, without exception, she hit the ground. Across roughly 10 takes, Andrews spent approximately half of them face down in a Bavarian meadow. The image the world carries from that opening, the freedom, the lightness, the pure, uncomplicated joy of it, was earned by a woman getting back on her feet again and again in the cold and the mud.
Number 6. The real Maria is in the movie.
Now, here is one of the most rewarding hidden details in the entire Sound of Music, Tazadie, the kind of thing that sends people straight back to a specific moment in the film to look for what they missed. Because the real Maria von Trapp, the actual woman whose memoir inspired the stage musical, the Broadway production, and the film, appears in the movie, not in a documentary segment, not in an archival photo, in the actual film. On screen, walking through a scene while Julie Andrews plays her. The moment is in the "I have confidence" sequence.
I have confidence they'll put me to the test.
Maria is making her way through Salzburg toward the Von Trapp house, singing as she walks. The scene takes her through a small tunnel, and as she passes through it and emerges on the other side, the real Maria von Trapp can be seen walking in the background to her left. It is brief. It requires knowing exactly where to look. And it places the woman whose life inspired the entire enterprise in the same frame as the actress performing a fictionalized version of that life, in the city where that life actually unfolded. Maria von Trapp was in her late 50s when the cameo was filmed. She had been living in Vermont since the real family's emigration to the United States decades earlier. The cameo was not accidental. It was a quiet, deliberate tribute, the production's way of acknowledging that behind the musical numbers and the Hollywood storytelling, there was a real woman whose real choices had brought all of it into existence. Most audiences watched that moment without knowing what they were seeing. Those who know it can never unsee it. All right, quick pause right here, because I want to know something from you. What is your all-time favorite moment from The Sound of Music? The opening meadow, the gazebo scene, Do-Re-Mi on the bicycle? Drop it in the comments. And if you're enjoying this deep dive, hit like and subscribe to Before TV and Cinema so you never miss one. We are back.
Number 7. The boat scene almost turned tragic.
Now, here is the behind-the-scenes story that most viewers would never guess from watching the finished film, because the boat scene looks warm, charming, and gently comic. A boat tips. 7 children fall into the water. Maria falls in too. The captain watches from the dock, unmoved. It is played entirely for laughs. What happened during the filming of that scene was not particularly funny, at least not until enough time had passed. Kim Karath, who played the youngest Von Trapp child, Gretel, could not swim. This was known. What apparently was not communicated clearly enough, or not communicated at all until essentially the last possible moment, was the practical consequence of this for a scene that required a boat full of children to capsize. Julie Andrews recalled that the assistant director informed her just before the scene was shot that the youngest child couldn't swim, and that Andrews should get to her immediately when they hit the water. Andrews planned accordingly, and then the boat tipped, and Andrews went off the wrong side. Instead of reaching Gretel, she fell back and had to swim frantically to get to where the child was. In the water and the confusion, Kim Karath went under at least twice. She came up, and then, as Andrews described it afterward, she threw up. It was another cast member, Heather Menzies, who played Louisa, who ultimately reached the youngest child and helped pull her to safety. The scene in the finished film shows none of this. The camera sees exactly what the audience is supposed to see: a family learning to be a family. The rest of the story stayed off screen. Kim Karath reportedly developed a lasting fear of water following the experience.
Number 8. Real life was the opposite.
Now, here is one of the most quietly significant departures between the film that audiences know and the history it was drawn from. Because one of the Sound of Music's central dramatic engines, the transformation of the cold, distant, whistle-blowing captain into a loving father, is built almost entirely on a fiction. The real Captain Georg von Trapp was, by the accounts of his own children, a warm, attentive, and gentle father. The children described him as someone who was present with them, engaged with them, and who showed his love openly. He was not a man who called his children to attention with a signal whistle. He was not a man from whom Maria had to win the children's affection because the children's affection for their father was never in question. The strict parent, the disciplinarian, the one whose rules and expectations defined life in the household, that was Maria. The real Maria von Trapp was, by multiple accounts, considerably more demanding with the children than the film suggests. The warmth and the playfulness and the easy connection with the children that Julie Andrews brings to the role was largely an invention of the stage musical and the film. The real Maria was complicated, determined, and far less effortlessly charming than her screen counterpart. The film essentially reversed the emotional truth of both parents to create a cleaner dramatic arc. The cold father who thaws, the warm governess who melts him. It worked brilliantly as cinema. It bore limited resemblance to the people it was nominally depicting. The real Von Trapp family were aware of the changes the story had undergone by the time it reached Hollywood, and their feelings about those changes were, at various points, not entirely warm.
Number 9, they sold their story for just $9,000.
Now, here is the economic reality behind one of the most commercially successful entertainment properties of the 20th century, and it is a story of a contract signed without legal counsel, a sum of money that seemed reasonable in the moment, and decades of watching a story you lived become a global institution worth hundreds of millions of dollars while seeing none of it. The real Maria von Trapp wrote The Story of the Trapp Family Singers in 1949. The memoir told the story of her life with the captain, the children, and the family's escape from Austria. In 1956, a West German filmmaker approached her about turning the book into a film. He offered her an immediate payment of $9,000 for the rights to her story. Maria signed the contract without consulting a business manager or attorney. The agreement included no royalty clause, no provision for ongoing payments as the project generated revenue. It was a one-time payment, $9,000, and the story was his. What followed was a chain of transactions that Maria and her family had no part in. 2 successful German-language films were made. The rights then moved to Rodgers and Hammerstein, who turned the story into the Broadway musical that ran for 1,443 performances. The rights then moved to 20th Century Fox, which made the film that saved a studio and became one of the highest-grossing movies in history. Today, the property is owned by the Walt Disney Corporation. The real Maria von Trapp received her $9,000 and nothing after that. The family whose escape from Austria she had documented, whose music she had described, whose life had generated all of it, watched from Vermont as the story became something the entire world knew and they could not share in financially. It is one of the sharpest lessons in the entire history of entertainment rights, and it begins with a contract signed without a lawyer in 1956 for a story worth a great deal more than $9,000.
Number 10, it stayed in theaters for 4.5 years.
And here's the final fact, and it may be the one that most completely captures the extraordinary, almost impossible commercial reality of what The Sound of Music became once it opened on March 2, 1965. The film did not perform like a normal hit. It did not open strongly, build for a few weeks, peak, and then taper off. The Sound of Music opened, and it kept going. Audiences came back. They brought other audiences. The same people came multiple times. Cities that had seen it run for months saw it keep running. Cinemas did not take it off the schedule because audiences were still filling the seats. The Sound of Music played in continuous theatrical release in cinemas week after week without interruption for 4.5 years. That is a record in American film history matched by essentially nothing else in the studio era. Gone with the Wind had been the standard. The Sound of Music surpassed it. For 5 consecutive years, it held the record as the highest-grossing film of all time. Sobbing was reported in theaters every time Christopher Plummer stood at a microphone and sang Edelweiss, the song that is not a folk song, sung in the voice that was not his own.
Bloom and grow forever.
For a character drawn from a man who was nothing like the film made him seem, and it didn't matter. None of the secrets mattered. What mattered was what happened in those darkened rooms, in city after city for 4.5 years. The Sound of Music is proof that a story told well enough becomes true in ways that facts cannot touch. And 60 years on, the hills are still very much alive. There you have it, 10 untold secrets and hidden facts about The Sound of Music. Which one surprised you the most? Which one are you still thinking about? Tell us in the comments below. Hit like if this one brought something back. Subscribe to Before TV and Cinema for more deep dives into the movies and television that shaped the way we see the world. And share this with someone who has the whole soundtrack memorized. Until next time, Before TV and Cinema.